大家好，今天咱们继续计算神经科学系列的一个知识的传播。今天要讲的呢，其实是一本书里的一部分节选，它实际上是在讲计算神经科学在现有阶段都有哪一些研究。我今天要讲的这部分呢是脑机接口。脑机接口实际上，也是近些年来比较热门的一个研究领域。我选的这本书呢，实际上是第二版的《计算神经科学百科全书》，是这一本。这一本如果大家有资源的话，可以去图书馆借阅一下。这本书在亚马逊上卖的也是很贵，折合人民币要15000块钱啊。这本如果有小伙伴有资源的话，可以借阅一下。嗯，这个呢是我总结的，按它这个书里的这个结构啊，总结的一个思维导图。它实际上脑机接口呢分为单向的、双向的，然后呢还和就是它的这个计算的这个关键吧，还和它的这个运算能力有关系。所以它整个文章的架构大概是以这样的一个形式去展开的。其中呢，单向的呢又分为传入、传出以及皮层的这个大脑的这个 BMI，双向的呢又分为感知运动的、认知的，以及将这种双向的脑机接口应用于神经病理学的这个疾患。第三部分就是和这个运算能力有关的一些这种计算设备。我还是就是说英文为主啊，这个里头也是怕我的这个翻译能力有限啊，耽误大家去理解，我尽量读慢一点。这个是从这个书里头摘选出来的，并不是全部。我有一些，主要是重要的内容，我全都放到上面了。A brain-machine interface is a direct communication pathway between the nervous system and a man-made computing device. This communication is unidirectional in BMIs that either record neural activity in the nervous system to affect the state of an external device or stimulate neural activity to affect the state of the nervous system. It can also be bidirectional, such as BMIs that record activity from certain parts of the nervous system and use this activity or features extracted from it in real time to stimulate activity in other parts of the system. This communication can occur at multiple levels, which may include muscles, peripheral nerves, spinal cord, or the brain. 它这段话实际上核心啊，就是说，提取神经信号，支配一个仪器，从而达到一个控制的一个效果。可以控制什么呢？肌肉、外周神经、脊髓，还有就是脑。所以这个还是很厉害的啊，这个已经有很多很多应用了。这是它的历史。The history 1990s nonetheless has witnessed a paradigm shift in the way recording and stimulation of neural activity is achieved. In particular, microwire bundles have been used to record the activity of a handful of neurons in awake-behaving animals. Striking advances in the microfabrication technology of high-density microelectrode arrays have later permitted large-scale simultaneous recording of many neurons in awake-behaving subjects, which eventually paved the way for these arrays to become a key element in BMI's development in subsequent years. 接下来呢是单向的这个脑机接口。大家看一下这个图啊，这实际上是刺激信号，感觉着这个刺激到了这个传导器以后，经过了特征提取，完了到了这个刺激的这个部分，刺激施予的这个仪器以后，完了再向这个大脑进行刺激，所以它中间涉及了一系列的这个信息转化。Afferent afferent 这个两个发音比较近啊，afferent 和 afferent，一个是 A 开头是传入，完了 E 开头的 afferent 那个是传出，就像这个传入通路和传出通路一样。Afferent BMIs rely on transforming features of sensory stimuli, for example, auditory, visual, to electrical pulse trains in order to stimulate neural activity in the central or the peripheral nervous systems to cause artificial sensation to compensate for some form of sensory loss, for example, deafness or blindness. Afferent BMIs rely on transforming features of sensory stimuli, for example, auditory or visual, to electrical pulse trains in order to stimulate neural activity in the central or the peripheral nervous systems to cause artificial sensation to compensate for some form of sensory loss. Auditory processes, such as cochlear implants, transform sound features recorded through a microphone to pulsatile currents in the spiral ganglia. This eventually elicits action potentials from residual hair cells in the auditory nerve of hearing-impaired subjects. Likewise, visual prostheses rely on transforming features of the visual scenes recorded through a video camera to stimulate different parts of the visual pathway in legally blind subjects. The site of stimulation along this pathway is a function of where neurodegeneration occurs, but the most promising demonstration of visual prosthesis thus far has been through the stimulation of the retinal ganglion cell layer that provide input to the optic nerve in patients with retinitis pigmentosa and age-related macular degeneration. 这个 retinitis pigmentosa 这个是没记错的话，这应该是色点的。这个叫视网膜炎，色点视网膜炎，就是说它一般用于像有这个病的这个病人，或者是其他这个有这个肌肉退行性老化的这个病人输入的这个视神经输入这些信号，像他们的这个主要是这个视网膜的这个神经节细胞来输入信号。这个是传出的脑机接口啊 ，afferent BMS rely on extracting features from recorded neural activity in real time that are subsequently transformed into control signals for actuating an external device. For example, a paralyzed limb. They can be categorized based on the recorded signal modality, which is predominantly neural. 大家看一下这张图啊，这张图实际上是一个传出的一个示意图，它是大脑传出这种感觉信号以后，经过特征提取，转化以后，完了传输到一个动力器里头。这个 actuator 实际上是可以控制外接设备来活动的，同时呢，这个里头还可以通过这可以相当于是一个人工的一个效应器，大家呢可以从这个人工的效应器里得到一些生物反馈，同时可以看到这个效果。这个就是传出脑机接口的一个思路。In afferent BMIs, the neural readout may differ in the temporal and spatial scales of variations, as well as in information content. 他们就是有几种技术吧，有几种技术在应用的时候呢，他们实际上时间上、空间上的这种这个分辨率也好，包括他们能传达的这个信息也好，是不太一样的。大家可以看一下这几张图，一个是什么呢？一个叫 action potentials， 一个是 local field potentials， 一个是 electrocorticogram， 一个是 electroencephalogram。这个里头呢，信息量最大的，大家可以看到啊，就是时间分辨率最好，信息量最大的其实是动作电位，而这个里头，空间分辨率，最好的其实也是动作电位，所以这个里头记录动作电位的应该是比较 好的一个测量。但是动作变位也有它的一个问题啊，大家也一会儿可以看一下。Well, the 1 to 2 microseconds action potentials elicited by individual neurons are known to contain large information about behavioral covariates. They tend to be highly variable and can only be recorded thus far using penetrating microelectrodes or using voltage-sensitive dye-based calcium imaging at shallow cortical depths, while local field potentials can also be recorded using penetrating electrodes. They contain less information than spike trains and are believed to provide a glimpse over the synchronized activity of large populations of neurons within a few 100 microns from the electrode tip. Macroelectrodes, either implanted subdurally to record ECOG or fixed extracranially to record surface EEG, offer another less risky alternative for EBMI since they are less or non-invasive. 这个实际上说了刚才这四种每一种的这个优缺点啊。如果总体来说就是有创，深入，那你得到的信息就多；越浅，没有创，那你实际上得到的信息就越少。这个是毫无疑问的。Another class of unidirectional BMIs, neither designed to directly cause sensation nor produce movements, is designed to stimulate neurons in the central nervous system to directly inhibit pathological behavior in subjects with neurological impairment. An example of such systems is deep brain stimulators, in which an electrode array is implanted in the subthalamic nucleus of the Parkinsonian patient, and macro stimulation of the SDN through a few electrodes leads to ameliorates the disease's symptoms by reducing 这个词我不认识，抱歉，and tremor. Similar designs are intended to regulate mood disorders or abate epileptic seizures. 实际上，这个说的是什么呢？这个说的就是说，直接是深脑刺激。这个说的是深脑刺激。现在也有一部分就是，比如说刺激基底神经节，好像我记得是有的深脑刺激。这个里头是可以治疗一些疾患的，比如说这个 tremor，还有这个叫什么 epileptic seizures，这个叫癫痫，对吧？所以它还是有很深的就很广的一个应用的，这是深脑刺激。下面一个是这个双向的脑机接口。双向脑机接口呢，实际上把这个里头的一些东西，两部分结合起来。它实际上思路是，我收集一部分信号，把这部分信号编码以后，再传给另外一部分，达到一个闭环的一个效果。大家来看一下啊。Bidirectional, or sometimes referred to as recurrent, BMIs differ from unidirectional BMIs in that neural environments are used in the input to the transform to compute stimulation parameters in real time. As such, they are considered closed loop compared to unidirectional BMIs that are open loop. This specific feature allows stimulation to be dynamic and to follow the dynamics of the neural input to the transform, which may be volitionally modulated by the subject in certain applications. Sensory motor BMIs 这打错了一个 sensory motor BMI 实际上是这种感知运动的这种脑机接口。This class of bidirectional BMIs combines recording and stimulation to restore one or more functions. For example, motor signals can be recorded from cortical areas and used to directly control muscle contraction or hand grasp via functional electrical stimulation. These signals can also be used to stimulate the spinal cord below the injury site using parameters extracted from cortical signals in real time or via stimulation of peripheral nerves. In that respect, this is a class of bidirectional BMIs that restores motor function through FES. Another class of bidirectional BMIs combines afferent and afferent BMIs to restore movements as well as sensory feedback in the form of touch and proprioception. The importance of such design is the indispensable role that somatic sensation plays in the integration and coordination of limb movements, particularly for complex upper limb functions such as reaching and grasping. This debate over which sides to stimulate and to restore somatosensory feedback, but the majority of approaches have focused on stimulation of peripheral nerves. Peripheral stimulation, however, is not feasible in patients with spinal cord injury. Recent reports devised protocols for these patients based on subcortical or cortical stimulation。这个实际上是对这个感知运动的一个恢复啊。实际上，这个对于脊椎受伤的一些人来说是一个福音。我记得咱们国家很久以前啊，有一个运动员叫桑兰，不知道咱们这个小伙伴有没有印象啊？他就是在比赛的时候，摔伤了以后，后来就没有办法，只能是坐轮椅了，运动生涯结束了。这个随着这个脑机接口技术的这种发展啊，我觉得对他们这样一个群体来说，也许是一个福音。在之后的若干年的发展以后，有可能会让这些人重新的这个获得这个运动能力，就是正常，至少是正常行走的能力吧。A third class of bidirectional BMIs aims to induce plastic changes in neural circuits by using patterns of activity recorded from one brain site to stimulate activity in another distal brain site in real time. Key to induce this plasticity is to ensure stimulation is delivered within a few milliseconds of recording spike events so as to promote LTP and LTD of synaptic connections, consistent with Hebbian plasticity. It is contended that this type of plasticity triggers functional as well as structural changes in the targeted neural circuits. The longevity of this plasticity, however, is yet to be demonstrated, since neurons return to their original encoding properties shortly after stimulation is terminated. 这个实际上说的是神经元的可塑性，但是它最后也说了一些局限，就是说它的这个编码的模式啊，在这个干预过后，实际上还是会复原的。所以这个应该是一个特性吧，大家可以有兴趣的话可以了解一下。下面一种是认知层面的这个脑机接口 ，cognitive BMIs。Certain brain areas have specific cytoarchitectonic architecture with known role in cognitive functions, such as the hippocampus role in the formation and maintenance of long-term episodic memory. This knowledge is critical to the ability to restore inter-areal as well as intra-areal information exchange by means of artificial devices. In this setting, neural activity is recorded from one upstream region, for example, hippocampus CA3, known to provide feed-forward information to downstream regions such as CA1. When the communication between the two regions is disrupted due to malfunctioning neural tissue, eventually causing memory loss, activity recorded from CA3 is decoded to predict the input to the CA1 region. The BMI then uses this prediction to derive the stimulation patterns needed to evoke biomimetic activity at the output of the CA1 region. Thus, the transform model in this BMI design lumps both the decoder of the input neural activity in CA3 and an encoder of the patterns to be evoked in CA1 through stimulation in one block. 这个里头他举了一个前馈的一个例子啊，就是海马的 CA3 区向 CA1 区传递的一个例子，大家可以看一下，它实际上是针对特定的细胞结构的 这些有特定认知功能的细胞结构，它们实际上是针对这一个主体来设计这个脑机接口。还有一部分呢，实际上是针对这个神经病理学的这个疾患的 bidirectional BMIs for neurological disorders. This class of BMIs extends cerebral BMIs to include a closed-up design that records neural activity and uses features extracted from these recordings to dynamically adjust the stimulation patterns in real time. A similar approach is used to reduce or prevent seizures from occurring in drug-resistant epileptic patients. This strategy is more advantageous compared to resection of the parts of the brain where hypothesized epileptic foci reside, which has been the standard clinical treatment for many years. Other examples use a familiar concept to treat brain injury or psychiatric diseases, such as traumatic brain injury, major depression, obsessive compulsory disorders, among others. 下面一个实际上说的是他们的这个跟计算有关的这个设备啊。A key element in BMI design is the computational capability of the device and the corresponding number of inputs and outputs. For example, in single input and single output BMIs, computations can be as simple as the detection of action potentials presence in a noisy electrode recording, followed by a spike count within a fixed time interval, that is usually 50 milliseconds. They can also consist of complex time, varying, and sometimes nonlinear transformation of multiple electrode recordings in multiple inputs, multiple outputs BMIs. EBMIs is in particular are designed to help the decoder extract the neural features, typically the firing rate of individual cells, to determine the state of the population. Because this state varies in time, it can be described by a trajectory in the neural state space. The transform then filters this state to reduce its dimension to a smaller number of variables that can be subsequently used to control the actuator. As such, the subject is required to learn this transformation with extended practice. 这个里头提到了一个就是单输入、单输出以及多输入、多输出的一个概念啊，所以这个里头还是不太一样的。其中和这个传出脑机接口的这个联系是比较紧密的，大家可以关注一下。Likewise, in afferent BMIs, the computing device extracts features from signals mirrored in the outside world to influence the trajectory of the stimulation parameters in the stimulation parameter space, because the mapping between the trajectory of natural stimuli in the task space and the evoked response in the neural state space, which is typically of much higher dimension, is unknown. Methods for finding the best stimulation strategies in open-loop BMIs are far from optimal. As such, the experimenter or clinician assumes that role of finding an optimal tune-up of stimulation parameters to restore a specific function by trial and error. For example, stimulation parameters, for example pulse frequency, in DBS systems are manually adjusted to fit each patient and reduce tremor. The lack of selectivity of electrical stimulation and the absence of knowledge of the dynamics of the neural circuits affected by stimulation, however, make this approach a real challenge. As such, characterizing the dynamics of stimulation invoked neural activity in upstream or downstream circuits becomes important in order to optimize the stimulation dose for restoring the desired function and to minimize any side effects over the long term. Thus, studying the neural system being stimulated by an artificial device may offer advantages in clinical BMI applications. 这里说的实际上是由于缺乏对基础机制的一些的了解啊，我们在临床应用的时候，在这种开环设计里头，实际上对于这个刺激的量来说，依然采取的是一种试错的一种方式，就是尝试，然后找这个最优解。但是这个还是面临很大挑战的，现在看起来。好， 这个就是脑机接口部分啊，这本百科全书给予我们的一些比较重要的一个 overview，就是一个概述。后面呢，它还给出了一些非常非常具体的一些事例，但是核心呢都是一个 prosthesis，就是一个假体。假体呢，大家可以去上网去查一下啊，尤其查一下这个一个叫做仿生学。或者还有一个就是干脆就查脑机接口的这相关方面的这个论文，就能查到这个跟假体有关的。现在主要来看就是听觉假体，还有这个视觉假体，这个实际上是和脑机接口相关的啊。当然了，传统的也有一些，比如说像这个做这个搭桥支架的，还有做一些就是控制这个手臂的这些，这个都是其他部分的。但是现在咱们主要跟脑有关的发展起来的，主要是这个听觉的，还有这个视觉的。有兴趣的话，大家可以多去翻看一下。不仅翻看一下这本书，也可以多翻看一下这方面的论文。好，咱们今天就讲到这里，感谢大家，再见。